Picture this, it's nearly midnight on a Monday in October 2006. Thousands of South Africans are glued to their computer screens, fingers hovering over the refresh button. They're not waiting for concert tickets or a Black Friday sale. They're waiting for something that would change South African aviation forever. When the clock struck midnight, over 10,000 flight requests flooded in per minute. The website crashed repeatedly. Social media lit up because Mango Airlines had just launched with our one flights, R1, to fly from Johannesburg to Cape Town. For the next 15 years, those bright orange planes with the heart logo became part of the South African dream. Mango was the airline that let everyday people fly. The domestic helper visiting family in Durban, the student going home for the holidays, the small business owner expanding to Cape Town. Mango wasn't just cheap, it was cool. They had live music on flights, Wi-Fi in the sky when everyone else was still serving peanuts. You could pay with your Edgars card at a checker still. They were innovative, fun, and proudly South African, but on July 28, 2021, every single Mango plane was grounded.
Let's go back to our top story now, where we told you about the grounding of Mango flights from midnight tonight after SAA Technical has withdrawn its maintenance services with immediate effect due to payment issues.
It operates. The suspension of the flights is with effect from this morning until the airline successfully secures additional funding.
Over 700 people lost their jobs. Hundreds of thousands of passengers lost their money. And after 4 years of false hope and broken promises, in August 2025, Mango Airlines was officially declared dead. This is the story of how South Africa's most beloved budget airline went from 10,000 bookings per minute to absolute zero. This is the business autopsy of Mango Airlines. SAA had a problem. They couldn't compete on price. They had unions, legacy costs, and expensive international routes. But they also couldn't just watch passengers fly away. So they created Mango, a separate airline, low cost but backed by SA's infrastructure and government support. On November 15, 2006, Mango's first flight took off from OR, Tembo, and from day one, they were different. They were the first African airline with in-flight Wi-Fi. The first to let you book flights on a mobile app back when most people still had flip phones. The first airline globally to accept store charge cards as payment. Think about that for a second. In South Africa, where millions of people don't have credit cards but do have an Edgars or Jet account, Mango said, use that to book your flight at the checker still while buying groceries. That wasn't just smart business. That was democratizing aviation. By 2012, Mango had the best on-time performance in South Africa for 6 consecutive years. They'd won multiple awards. Sunday Times readers voted them the coolest low-cost airline 4 years running. In 2018, Mango made AR 105 million profit. Their planes were full, routes were expanding, everything looked golden. But beneath the surface, the rot had already started. December 2019, SAA, Mango's parent company, entered business rescue. Think of business rescue like putting a patient in the ICU, not dead yet, but critical. SAA owed us 38 billion and needed a massive government bailout. Now here's where it gets messy. When SAA went into business rescue, Mango didn't. They were kept separate. On paper, this looked smart, keep the profitable airline operating while fixing the broken one. But in practice, Mango was the child of parents going through a nasty divorce while the house burned down. Then came March 2020, COVID-19. President Ramaphosa announced the hard lockdown.
From midnight on Thursday, 26th March, until midnight Thursday, the 16th of April, all South Africans will have to stay at home.
And every single plane in South Africa was grounded. For 9 months, Mango earned nothing. Zero. But costs, those don't stop. You still owe money to aircraft leasing companies. You still have staff to pay. You still have debts accumulating interest. By the end of 2020, Mango had swung from AR 105 million profit to AR 497 million loss. In October 2020, the government made a promise. They allocated 819 million to help SAA subsidiaries, including Mango, SAA Technical, and Air Chefs. Parliament approved it. The money was set aside. Mango just needed to wait for it to arrive. January 2021, no money. February 2021, no money. March 2021, no money. April 2021, wait until June, they said.
Fundamental problem of SAA is a weak capital base and a weak balance sheet. My question to you as a CEO, are you comfortable that this strategy that you tabled to Parliament today will address this fundamental problem of SAA?
This strategy provides us a roadmap into the future. We know where we're going, both in the short term as well as in the medium to long term. We understand that change takes time, We must give the LTTS the time it requires to yield the desired result.
But Mango's creditors, especially the aircraft leasing companies, had waited long enough. They gave an ultimatum: pay what you owe by April 30th, or we are taking our planes back. On April 28, 2021, Airports Company South Africa physically barred Mango planes from taking off. The airline owed 156 million in landing fees. Passengers were stranded mid-journey. Chaos at Otembo, Cape Town, and Durban airports. Mango managed to scrape together enough money to fly again that evening, but the damage was done. 2 months later, on July 28, 2021, Mango suspended all flights. The airline owed 57 million to air traffic and navigation services, the people who guide planes through our skies. No payment, no flying. Mango entered business rescue. The bright orange planes were parked, covered, silent. The question everyone asked was, how long until they fly again? The answer would be, never. When a business dies, there's rarely one cause. It's usually 3 or 4 major failures happening at once. Let me break down exactly what killed Mango Airlines. Mango's original sin was being born to SAA. Imagine your parent is a gambling addict who keeps borrowing money and losing it. Eventually, no one will lend to you either, even if you're responsible. When SA entered business rescue in December 2019, it owed a 38.4 billion. That's billion with a B. They'd received government bailout after bailout, money that could have built hospitals or schools. SA was also Mango's only shareholder. So when SA needed money, they couldn't help Mango. When Mango needed money, SAA couldn't provide it. Both were drowning, and instead of throwing a life jacket, SAA threw an anchor. Here's the kicker: Mango owed 718 million to SAA Technical for aircraft maintenance. SAA owed Mango money too. It was a circular nightmare where government entities owed each other billions while all of them were technically broke. Let me explain what happened with that 819 million in the simplest terms. Imagine you're in a hospital, bleeding out, and the doctor says, we have the blood for your transfusion, it's right here. But first we need 3 signatures, 2 committee meetings, and the minister needs to approve the color of the blood bag. That was Mango's reality. Parliament approved 819 million rand for Mango in October 2020. By June 2022, 20 months later, only a 225 million had been released. And that was only after Mango's business rescue practitioner, Saifo Sono, literally threatened to drag Minister Pravin Gordhan to court.
Objection of the minister was based on his understanding of Section 54(2) of the PFMA, which he thought that he could have unlimited time to consider the application of Mango, whereas in fact that very same section has got a deeming provision that says if he hasn't made a decision within 30 days, then the relevant state-owned company that made the application is entitled to assume that he has granted that approval. So the court has effectively affirmed that position, and that deeming provision is now already operational. So there is nothing that can be done to change that. So that whole issue of Section 54 now is no longer an impediment to us implementing the business rescue plan.
Why the delay? Red tape. The Public Finance Management Act has strict rules. Department of Public Enterprises needed to approve. SA needed to submit applications. The Treasury needed to process. Each step took months. Meanwhile, every day of delay cost Mango money. Business rescue costs are 11.4 million. Legal fees are 26.8 million. Consultants are 24.2 million. And the biggest expense, staff salaries and severance packages, are 442 million. By July 2021, Mango owed workers 157 million in unpaid salaries. Some employees hadn't been paid in 3 months. These weren't rich executives, these were pilots, cabin crew, ground staff with families to feed.
The demands were based on money owed to the pilots.
Having said that, it was inflationary increase and the salary cuts that we endured pre-COVID. And then once the resumption of operation, the 30% was based on the equivalent of the company giving us 30% would bring us back somewhat towards the previous scales. But we were cognizant that the company would not have the money to do that.
But even if Mango had gotten all the money immediately, there was a third killer: South African bureaucracy. In August 2022, finally, a buyer appeared. Ubuntu Air, a consortium of South African investors, made a binding offer. They would buy Mango for a 1,000, yes, 1,000 rand, inject our 1 million in new capital, take on the unflown ticket liabilities, and pay creditors. It wasn't a great deal, but it was a lifeline. The creditors voted in favor. The business rescue practitioner approved it. Everything was set. SA submitted the application for ministerial approval on September 30, 2022. Under the law, the minister had 30 days to approve or reject it. December came and went. No decision. A second application was submitted on November 28. Still no response. Months turned into years. Ubuntu Air waited and waited and waited. Why the delay? Nobody knows. Some reports suggest SAA had queries. Others say the Department of Public Enterprises wanted to explore other options. Aviation expert Barry Parsons was blunt. Government obstruction was relentless. Here's what happened in the meantime. Mango's airline licenses expired. You can't just renew them without operating. You need to prove you have aircraft, crew, and safety systems. Mango had none of these in May 2023. Mango sold one of its aircraft engines for $96 million just to keep the business rescue process funded. Then in June 2025, a creditor named Aviation Coordination Services challenged the business rescue plan in court. They argued, correctly, that asking creditors to accept 12 cents per rand owed while giving up all rights to future claims was unfair. The Johannesburg High Court agreed. The rescue plan was halted. Ubuntu Air said they could wait 3 months. They'd already waited nearly 3 years. What's another quarter? On July 31, 2025, Ubuntu Air sent a letter to Saifosono. We've had second thoughts about the transaction and will not be proceeding. The reasons: delays have made resumption of operations unrealistic, and our funding partner backed out. After waiting 3 years for approvals, after the licenses expired, after the planes were sold, after the staff scattered to other airlines, there was nothing left to buy except a name and some debt. Saifosono proposed a structured wind down instead of immediate liquidation. Think of it like this: in a liquidation, you chop up the body and sell organs to the highest bidder. In a structured wind down, you have an orderly funeral and divide the estate. The math was simple. Structured wind down, creditors get 12.18 cents per rand owed. Immediate liquidation, creditors get 2.68 cents per rand owed. Mango owed us 6.4 billion. They had a 383 million in cash, but our 207 million went straight to SARS as a priority creditor. That left our 166 million for everyone else. Foreign creditors owed our 4.5 billion would receive our 123 million total. That's 2.7 cents per rand. On August 18, 2025, creditors voted to approve the wind down. Mango Airlines was officially over. So what does Mango's debt tell us about South Africa in 2025? Lesson 1: state-owned enterprises are systemic risk. Mango didn't fail because of bad service or poor management. At its peak, it was profitable, efficient, and loved by customers. It failed because it was tied to SAA, and SAA was tied to a government that couldn't make decisions fast enough. Kulula, owned by Comair, collapsed in 2022. SA Express collapsed in 2020. Mango in 2025, the only airline that survived business rescue. SAA itself, which got a 10.5 billion to restructure. The pattern is clear in South African aviation: being private doesn't guarantee survival, but being state-owned almost guarantees failure. Bureaucracy kills faster than competition. Mango had a buyer ready in August 2022. If that deal had been approved in 30 days as the law intended, Mango would still be flying today. Instead, ministers delayed, committees deliberated, and forms were filed in triplicate. 3 years. That's how long it took for the government to not make a decision. And in that time, licenses expired, investors walked away, and a 830 million was spent on salaries, legal fees, and consultants with nothing to show for it. This is the red tape tax that every business in South Africa pays, but state entities pay triple. Lesson 3: less competition means higher prices. When Mango was grounded in 2021, 14% of South Africa's domestic capacity vanished overnight. When Kulula collapsed in 2022, another 40% disappeared.
News from the aviation world, and it was nothing less than a nightmare for hundreds of passengers of South Africa's Comair, in a move that also affects low-cost airline Kulula and British Airways.
Operates Kulula and British Airways.
Now, here's the problem. It says it simply doesn't have enough money to operate. The carrier, which is currently in business rescue, says it's trying to source more funding.
Today, FlySafair carries 60% of domestic passengers, about 30,000 people per day. They're efficient and well-run, but that kind of market dominance is never good for consumers. Flying from Johannesburg to Cape Town used to be competitive, with multiple airlines fighting for your 800. Now, try a 500 on a busy weekend. The death of Mango hurt more than just 700 employees. It hurt every South African who needs to fly affordably. Lesson for the promise isn't the problem, it's the process. Here's what frustrates people most about Mango's collapse. The government allocated a 819 million in October 2020. Parliament approved it. The money existed. But the process to actually release that money took 20 months and multiple court threats. By the time it arrived, it was too late. This is South Africa's chronic disease, not a lack of resources, but an inability to deploy them efficiently. Whether it's Mango, potholes, or textbook delivery, the pattern repeats: promise made, approval given, money allocated, and then nothing happens. Mango Airlines gave millions of South Africans their first taste of flight. It proved that aviation didn't have to be for the elite. For our 800, a domestic worker could visit her sick mother in Cape Town. For 1.2, a student could interview for a job in Durban. Those bright orange planes with the heart logo represented something bigger than cheap tickets. They represented possibility, and we killed it. Not through market forces or natural competition, but through bureaucratic incompetence, delayed decisions, and the curse of being tied to a failing state enterprise. 700 plus jobs lost, are 6.4 billion in claims, 300k plus stranded passengers, one airline gone forever. The next time you pay a 3,000 for a domestic flight that used to cost a 800. Remember Mango. Remember that sometimes the free market doesn't kill businesses, governments do. This has been a business autopsy. The patient is dead. The cause of death, bureaucratic strangulation. And the tragedy is, it was completely preventable. If you learn something from this business autopsy, hit subscribe. Next week, we're dissecting another South African business collapse, one that'll surprise you. Drop a comment: what South African business should we autopsy next?